Welcome everybody to our Lunch and Learn, our latest in our new series, Ethics Cafe, as we work on how to navigate our boundaries and ethics as social workers working in varied systems. And we want to begin with a land acknowledgement. I'd like to invite each of you to join me in the chat and acknowledge the name where you are at. You can just go to Google, but one website that I personally like is placenames.mapdev.ca. You can see that written down on the bottom right of the screen. What's nice about this is it really gives us a chance to learn how to pronounce, not just how to write. And it's so important as part of our recognizing this beautiful land upon which we as uninvited settlers are, that we really are intentional about this. I also want to invite you, especially if you're joining us through YouTube after the fact as a recording, to take this moment to connect with the land. We need to do this more often. There are many ways of doing it, from grounding ourselves, maybe going outside barefoot now that it's spring and feeling connected to this land, but also thinking about the deeper issues related to how and why we are on this land and what this land is. So as you find ways of connecting to this land acknowledgement on your own personal level, I invite us to take a deep breath. And I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am speaking from Wasakusikuam, which is located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, whose inherent rights were recognized in the peace and friendship treaties that were signed with the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples from 1725 to 1779. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. The treaties were later reaffirmed by Canada in Section 35 of the Constitution Act in 1982, and they remain active to this day. Let us take this time to pause in reflection and gratitude for the land where we live and work. The Nova Scotia College of Social Workers commits to translating this acknowledgement into action. By seeking to implement the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, especially those regarding education, we commit to doing what we can to becoming better treaty. We commit to learning and to unlearning. Let us take this moment to pause in gratitude for all who have and continue to heroically care and advocate for this beautiful land. May we join them in this sacred work. Let us ground ourselves in the wisdom of the land-based Mi'kmaq teachings and values that we must all begin to learn. Let us work to decolonize ourselves, our practice, and this community that we share by working for justice for all human beings as an expression of our gratitude for being here. Let us take a deep breath and recenter ourselves away from the violent ways colonization fills our world and fills us. Let us take a deep breath and work on letting go of the unconscious bias that is everywhere, inside and out. May our session today lead us to be in right relationship with this land and with one another. Walalu. And I'm going to stop share. So very grateful for this exciting Ethics Cafe. We are joined by Lauren Matheson, who is in her day job. She is working with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, but we are also so grateful because Lauren serves as co-chair of our Professional Standards and Ethics Committee, and indeed has been chair of our Ethics Committee, and is going to be speaking in a few moments a little bit. I also want to take this moment to introduce you to, hopefully you already know this familiar face, but if you don't, hopefully you will come to learn about Marika Warren. Dr. Warren is going to be better able to introduce herself, but very briefly works at Dalhousie in bioethics and oversees ethics consultations and bioethics across Nova Scotia. In particular with IWK and Nova Scotia Health. And one of the things that we have been very aware of as we have been building our ethics consultation process and working to support our members in ethics is, and I'm going to remove the spotlight for a second as I talk briefly, and then I will reintroduce them. One of the things that we're aware of is a lot of times when our members consult with us and they reach out, they have an ethics concern. First of all, hopefully you all know about our ethics decision-making tool on our website, which helps you begin to think about ethical decisions and what happens when you're in conflict. Now, the reality is that social workers are generally the ones facing ethical dilemmas first, foremost, and most frequently and most significantly, because our work, especially in healthcare teams, but this is true outside of healthcare as well, our work is to dive into the messy parts of life. So whereas some professions can come in and give a person an injection or a pill and life moves forward, and that sometimes seems less complicated, we are the ones that come in when life is complicated and messy and sit with people in that pain, in that messiness, in that injustice. And that often means that we find ourselves at the intersections of multiple competing values and systems and approaches. And so on the one hand, we have our code of ethics, and that in itself is problematic. And as you hopefully know, the Canadian Association of Social Workers has been working tirelessly to rewrite a new code of ethics for us as a profession, because our existing code of ethics we now understand to be deeply reflective of the Eurocentric Christian colonizing values, patriarchal, queerphobic values that we are reflective of the systems within which we work and that are reflective of the founding of our profession. And so as part of our commitment to decolonization and moving to more explicitly anti-racist practice that reflects a justice approach, we are working on creating a new code of ethics that is explicitly anti-racist, because in a racist world, in a colonized world, it's not enough to avoid harm, because avoiding harm is really complicated when we're working in systems that were created in harm to cause harm, created to colonize, created to achieve certain goals that go counter our code of values as a profession and our commitment to social justice and equality and well-being for all humans and for all people and for our planet. So we are working on a new code of ethics, and you've perhaps had an opportunity to provide input on it. We are going to continue to working on that. It's been developed through consultation with a variety of different community groups and first voice individuals who have historically been underrepresented, whose voices and concerns have been underrepresented in the development of our profession. So that is exciting. We are not there yet. It means we have our current code of ethics, which has its own challenges. And we as a profession are here to support each of you in how to navigate that. And Lauren's going to speak a little more about our ethics consultation process that we developed for our members so that you know what that is. But what is also true is that many times people contact us with ethical dilemmas that have nothing to do with our code of ethics. It has to do with the systems within which we work, which are challenging at best. And so that is why I'm so excited about Dr. Marika Warren joining us and has been behind the scenes meeting with us, with Lauren, with members of our professional standards and ethics committee to help us begin to think about how do we as a profession connect with the existing resources within the system for ethics consultation. And Dr. Warren will speak a little more about that as well. One of the things that's very important to me that I've had an opportunity to do in a prior role where I worked as vice president of a hospital system and I oversaw a lot of our ethics consultation processes is I saw the ways in which ethics consultation, when done right, is a strategy for not just advocacy, but for actual policy change. So, for example, we saw profound gaps in service and resources in our hospitals where I've been previously. And our social workers and our chaplains in particular were really good at engaging other members of the team in understanding and utilizing those processes in place in order to raise a red flag. Hey, this isn't working and patient harm is happening or might happen, or staff harm is happening or might happen. Our repositioning report that we had identified that social workers working in mental health, 98 or 99% experience severe moral distress. If you have not yet, please go to our Facebook page to look at our recent advocacy day where we had doctors, nurses, and other members of interprofessional, interdisciplinary care teams crying, reflecting on their moral distress around our existing systems. We have outlets for that. And we're developing through our social justice committee, we're developing advocacy processes that can help on an external level, build resources and tools so that we can advocate for change. But there are methods within the system. And a lot of our members struggle with that. Dr. Warren is going to speak to us more about some ways that we can, when we see ethical concerns, we can raise our hand, we can shine a spotlight, and we can show that this is not working, and we can gather together other professions, doctors, nurses, other team members, and work to address what is the most ethical possible outcome, and from that develop internal cohesion, collaboration, and agreement so that we can work on change from the inside out. I have seen change happen using this method, and that is something that I am excited for us in Nova Scotia to do. And that is only possible by building the connection between individual professional bodies and the system. And that change has to happen inside, because there's ways you can call people out and you can call people in. When you do change from the inside, Dr. Warren can talk to us about that. Lauren has been working with, and I want to take this moment to also give credit to Amber Gallant, who was our social work student intern last year, and who did a lot of the heavy lifting to help us begin to think about best processes. And we are building a pathway of communication so that that distress has an outlet. So with that, I'm going to now introduce Lauren and invite Lauren to give a brief overview of our current ethics decision-making process that exists. Our committee is always looking for more people, so if you're interested in joining, please contact me and we will love to have you. We're working on all sorts of exciting issues that can hopefully create systemic change. So with that, no more from me. Lauren, over to you.
Hello. Thank you, Naj. Wonderful. So glad to be here. We love to talk about ethics and ethics questions and all things ethics consultation. So I'm super happy to talk about it. I will share my screen now. So my name is Lauren Matheson. I am located in Jabuktuk-Mi'kma'ki. Here we go. And you should be seeing a PowerPoint here. There we go, from the beginning. So about a year and a bit ago, along with Amber Gallant, we decided to start tackling the question of how does the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers, how can we best support the members, particularly when facing ethical conflicts and challenging decisions. So there is an existing tool that is on the website. It's a decision-making tool, ethical decision-making tool. And as Naja indicated, other than that, social work members would contact the college and say, I have a query, I have a question, I need to talk this through. And that would either be done between one or two members of the college. And so the goal was really to develop a process to understand how best to support members. And to start that, we were looking at what are other colleges doing? What are other places doing? And what are some of the pros and cons of what they have found works for their members and what doesn't work. And so we contacted 11 colleges and associations, ended up communicating with 10, and primarily they were across Canada, and then you'll see there were some in New Zealand, as well as the Australian Association of Social Workers. We weren't able to communicate with BC, but generally speaking, we were able to either have email communication or a phone Zoom interview with all of the others. And so really the contact points for these groups was sample of these questions. So do you have a consultation process? When members come to you with ethical questions, what's your response? If you don't have a consultation, why not? Do you have a framework for these consultations? Do you have an ethics committee that is involved with any consultation or any tool development or around ethics or ethics questions? What are your resources? If you do have a consultation process, is this staffed? And so these were some of the questions that we started with, and really to get to the end of the nitty gritty of what people were doing and what works. And so baseline findings were really that there were two things happening. So there were associations or colleges had tools. So those were kind of those static tools that exist on the websites. They can be, an example would be the ethical decision-making tool, similar to what the college, Nova Scotia College of Social Workers has online, continuing competence models and programs that are available from the college on a rolling basis. And some associations had e-learning platforms with ethics modules so that people could access them all year round, any time of the day, that kind of thing. And particularly, they were kind of linked into the professional development for their members. And so really it was these tools, educational resources, and regulations. And so really people were saying tools are great for these quick turnaround and ethical guidance, unlike instances where you need consultation, which can really take a longer time. It might take a longer time to even get some of the committee members together if you have an ethics committee that would be assisting in the question. And so they really saw it as the quick turnaround time. Developing tools, generally speaking, again, another theme for the tools was tracking some of the themes and questions that came up for these ethical queries. And that would help inform what next tools were needed, and if there was any specific one-off or ongoing education sessions that members might find useful that were provided by the college or the association. The second finding was really that people were offering ethical consultation processes. And so the examples of that were really similar to what the Nova Scotia College does. It's this point person employed with the college. A member would contact that point person and they would talk through the ethical query or question. The other example, which was more involved and takes a lot more time and staff and volunteer members, was there was a point person and a committee of volunteers or staff members. And that really was what would be considered like the ethics committee. And so generally speaking, a point person would bring the concern of the member to the committee, and then there would be a discussion, and the committee could meet with the member, or if the member didn't want that, they could provide kind of feedback and thoughts on the question. And then kind of as was preempted before, in most instances, the initial contact person would really determine, is this a legal matter? Is this a workplace conflict? Is this a scope of practice or a standards practice issue? Or is this an ethical dilemma, particularly within the code of ethics? And so that really is this great entry point for deciding, okay, how do we best support our members? And then these are some of the general how-tos, associations, but generally speaking, if an association decided to have a consultation process where they had an ethics committee, it did usually require a set of volunteers. Some of them had minimal staffing. And when we say minimal, it would be like, very few people. And so generally speaking, it was volunteer run, and lack of staffing was considered an issue by most associations to be able to kind of fully actualize an ethics committee. And so if they weren't able to do that, a lot of the organizations would have tools, those static tools online. One of the things that we really love talking to the New Zealand Association, because they really were saying like, okay, this is great. If you want to do this, we really recommend that the committee membership for an ethics committee be 50% Indigenous and traditionally excluded individuals. And in the case of Nova Scotia, African Nova Scotian and African individuals. And so really making sure that it's not just a committee that people are going to come to and feel excluded from to begin with, and that their questions and their queries on ethics are really not being understood and met. As well, they were saying, really, if you're going to have a committee and you're going to offer this to the wider public, please ensure that this is a professional development inclusion, and that individuals know that, okay, if I have a question, I can come to you and I can learn more, and that if I'm on the committee, that this is labor and this is something that the college values. And so, and lastly, the associations really agreed that the committees weren't giving advice. They were really kind of providing these thought-provoking questions that should be provided to help guide practitioners in their decisions. There's some further recommendations. I'll just leave this up for a sec. But basically, where we are now is figuring out the next steps. So potentially the ethics consultation could look something as I just described. So this is like a summary of a lot of the information that we found. So that NSCSW staff receives an initial request and does the screening to determine, is this an ethical issue or a workplace issue or another issue? And then from there, you would move forward. And so the reason why the NSHA IWK referral is in there is, again, relating to what Naj was saying before, is that wanting to have this broader network of individuals in the community to have the best support possible for some of the questions that members are bringing forward. I'm just going to skip forward. So potential next steps for where we are now and what we've learned from this, from the ethics consultation process, is really trying to provide the feedback, or provide this information to members and get any feedback that you have. And so, do you have questions on this? Are you learning about, we provided this before, and I think some individuals just, their feedback was really helpful, saying, I didn't realize that I could bring ethics questions to the college. But now, now I know that this is happening. And so really, we're just trying to push this out to members and just move forward on the next step, which is decision on forming an ethics work group. And then the next steps that would be attached with something that looks like this. So I feel like I'm at my time. So I'm not going to keep going, but I'm happy to answer any questions. I know this was really quick, but yeah, I will throw it back over to Naja Marika.
Thank you so very much. So I'm going to I'm trying to get this out. So now we're going to have a chance to meet here, learn more about Dr. Warren and the options that currently exist within the system. And again, all of this is an invitation. We want all of our members to join us in caring passionately about how to ensure more ethical processes, not just for social workers, but for all healthcare providers. And because as social workers, we come from a systems lens, that gives us unique opportunities and positionality to join Dr. Warren in her amazing efforts to ensure better support for all healthcare workers and most importantly for the patients and communities that we serve. Dr. Warren, over to you.
Perfect. So as mentioned, I'm involved with ethics support throughout Nova Scotia, and I'm situated in the Department of Bioethics at Dalhousie. But my main gig within the work that we do as a department in terms of our various ethics collaborations work with the Nova Scotia Health Ethics Network, which is that collaboration that Naj mentioned that joins Department of Health and Wellness, Nova Scotia Health, and IWK, in the hopes that there's opportunities for sharing and also developing common and consistent approaches to ethics issues that arise throughout the healthcare system. And so my plan is to very briefly run through what the Nova Scotia Health Ethics Consult process looks like. It's going to be fairly similar to what Lauren mentioned, in that the ethics consult piece of working through the values is fairly similar across a number of different contexts, but to give you a sense of here's the website, here's the form, here's the nitty gritty of how you get in touch, and then I'll talk briefly about some of those scope pieces, how to determine which of these processes to use, and I'm hoping to move fairly quickly through that so that we do have time for discussion and getting to the questions. I should also note that a lot of this is also currently under redevelopment in terms of both the forms that I will show you and the structure of how we do ethics support, particularly within Nova Scotia Health. So stay tuned on that. I'll try and flag where the directions that we think we're headed, but we're in an interesting time of change as we try and figure out how to provide support, which the demand for supports are increasing at a time when a lot of the folks who we've often called upon to help us provide that support, often the off the side of desk format, does that just bandwidth and capacity just has really been eliminated throughout the healthcare system. And I'll just give a quick plug. If there's anyone who on the call and is working within Nova Scotia Health or outside and is interested in coming on as a community member, you think, wow, I'd really like to get more involved in the Ethics Nova Scotia Health work, please reach out and get in touch with us, because similarly to Lauren, more hands make light work, and certainly traditionally we found a lot of social workers that have been involved with a lot of the ethics committees throughout the province. So just want to put that general plug in. All right, so in terms of how you get a hold of us, you have two different options, which may or may not be easy. They lead you to the same place. So there's a public-facing Ethics Nova Scotia Health page that I'm sharing here that has links to various forms for different types of ethics support. So the clinical ethics consultation is probably what folks are most familiar with, and that's generally driven by concerns that are coming from a particular case of dealing with patients and their loved ones, and questions about how to provide care there. But sometimes there may be needs for ethics education, and that's certainly support that we provide as well, whether you want one of us to come in and do an entire ethics education day, or to collaborate on an ethics aspect of a broader presentation that's being done. we participate in policy development and review processes. So if there's, again, a policy process that you're part of, we're happy to support that work. And then finally, where it's a question more about sort of organizational process, then there's also the organizational ethics consultation stream as well. And if you aren't sure, to be honest, filling out any of these forms goes to the same place. And often there's a lot of discussion in the intake process around what the best form of support is. So really all of these forms, and I'll show you an example of the clinical ethics consult form in a minute, sort of help to capture what the relevant concerns are and what the sort of context is for them. And then again, we sort of usually work out what the best approach is, and sometimes it's a multi-pronged, and in the sorts of complex cases often that prompt people to work out, sometimes they'll be like, okay, there's a clinical piece and can have that discussion with the team or with the patient and their loved ones, but there's also an organizational piece, and so sometimes there'll be sort of multi-pronged response. So there's also available on this page is an ethics tool that's oriented toward patients and families that's been translated. And that's a resource that you can direct patients and families to where they might be having their own sort of ethical struggles with the care decisions that a loved one is making, or about the sort of dynamic with the team. So that support, though, is also one that can be used by staff as well, that in other jurisdictions where they've developed some of these tools, they found that it's done intentionally in plain language. I think ethics might occur in the title and nowhere else. So we really wanted to make it sort of as clear and concrete as we could. And other healthcare providers sometimes have said, I know this is oriented toward patients and loved ones, but I found it really useful as well for myself. So that resource is available again on the public facing page, and Googling Ethics Nova Scotia Health will bring you to that one. The other option that you have is on—
I'm going to just interrupt for 5 seconds to say, if you want to just contact us, we can always also help put you in touch. So just know that's yet another option.
Perfect. Yes, feel free to make the college your first point of call. Part of the goal of this collaborative work for us is to keep those lines of communication open and flowing back and forth. So where there may be a question that comes to us that's more professional practice related, where you might say, actually, you're better supported by the college process. And so then the corporate website just has a few more resources that are again oriented towards providers. So again, just wanting you to know that they're there. And again, that's the sort of the tools that often are in the form of, have you thought about this? Have you asked these questions? So in any ethics process, the goal isn't necessarily getting to the one right answer, but it's about how we get there. What have we taken on board in our consideration and our thinking and reflection? And so with all of these sorts of tools, that's the objective there. I'm now going to stop sharing this screen and share the other screen that has the intake form on it. Just again, so that you're able to see that when you click on request clinical ethics consultation or any of the others, you get to a form like this. Again, these are being revised to be more streamlined, user-friendly, and only capture the information that we really need. So again, in terms of things that have shifted around privacy and expectations. So if there's somewhere you think like, they're asking for patient names, that's one of the things that we're definitely coming off of this particular form. But at this point, there's administrative folks who have a role in sort of taking these forms in that are in each of the zones, but there's one central phone number that you can use as a point of contact here. And then the rest of the form just serves to capture sort of how urgent the request is and to get a sense of what the initial question or issue is, and some of the background or context that might be helpful again for us when we get the request, and starting to think through what sort of support might be most appropriate for the particular situation. Once we've got this form, then there's a process where we sort of look at it and make sure it does fall within our scope, because sometimes there are questions that might arise where there are ethics aspects to it, but the sort of support that we can provide in terms of identifying what values are relevant and how those should guide action isn't really what's needed in the situation. It may be very clear what should be done, and the challenge is that something is not being done. And so there, often instead of having a consult process, we may either look at redirecting to quality, to legal, to patient relations, but we do keep track of those in terms of some of the work that we do around identifying, what are some of the barriers as well as facilitators within organizations, within systems that are sort of preventing people from doing what sort of they already know they should do. And so there's that intake process, and then someone who is involved with Ethics Nova Scotia Health will sort of be assigned taking the lead. We try and do a small team consult process between 1 and 3 folks to lead a discussion. Again, the number of bodies available at this stage doesn't always allow that to happen. But we try and ensure, if at all possible, that there are folks who are familiar with sort of the local context and situation, and who have some of the sort of on the ground understanding of what some of the regional values that might be relevant are. Even within a small context like Nova Scotia, relatively speaking, I would argue that there are sort of real values differences that matter in terms of healthcare, between Yarmouth and Sydney. And so, we try and make sure that we've got that sort of local understanding as part of the discussion, but again, not always possible. And then we do whatever sort of is needed, depending on that discussion with the requester. It's a confidential conversation, so approval is not required from anyone to reach out and contact us or to continue to engage and have discussions. So we'll have a conversation around sort of who needs to know. On our end as consultants, the content is confidential, but at the end, a report with recommendations will be produced, and requesters are able to share that sort of as appropriate within the organization. And we keep it as high level as we can, so that, again, with attention to privacy and confidentiality obligations, but where there's, again, those sort of systemic concerns around ethics, that we're able to identify those in a sort of consistent and high level way across reports. So, and this is the key piece with the sort of the advocacy and taking it further, and the ways in which ethics consultation can be one way of addressing some of that, that moral distress. So, the themes identified in those recommendations, we report through one of the VPs. Currently, it's Krista Grant, who's the VP of Communications at Nova Scotia Health, in order to, so again, identify some themes and trends, and where there's need for example, revisiting a policy or developing a policy, or looking to strengthen processes within the organization in order to, again, address some of the areas of concern or that are contributing to the ethics concern. And then there's also, with those recommendations, feeding into the work of Nova Scotia Health Ethics Network. So our primary objective is capacity building. And so where we see, again, similar to what Lauren was saying in terms of things coming out of the college consults, are translated into tools, resources, education. So as for us, does it say, okay, well, we are seeing, for example, a lot of cases that have to do in one way or the other with harm reduction. And so, that's something that we then look at exploring in, for example, our annual conference, or for this year's annual conference, which we've got Naj participating in. We're looking at the relationship between ADIRA and ethics, particularly within the context of healthcare. And so what are the overlaps, and what are some of the differences in terms of work in both of those areas? So that's the way that sort of the consult process works. Again, sort of high level and fairly quick. And in any specific case, there'll be a lot of details that would matter in terms of determining how things roll out. But our general objective, again, as with the college processes, that it's about providing support. It's about helping folks to work through what's different about this situation that has given rise to concern that hasn't come up in other similar situations. So again, what is unique here that gives you that sort of sense of unease, or something not sitting right with you that needs to be addressed, again, either at the level of a team or an organization, or that broader systems level. So in terms of thinking about, oh, sorry, I'm going to pause briefly just for any questions of clarification around those processes. And I'm going to stop sharing.
So yeah, please put in the chat if you have any quick questions. Deeper questions we will save till at the end of the presentation, but any quick questions around clarification? I'm not seeing any, so I'd say let's continue.
Fantastic.
I will stop recording when it's time for the deeper conversation question.
Excellent. All right, so in terms of thinking about, again, sort of which process should I engage with, I think as clear-cut as anything ever is in ethics, which is not very, but I think if it's a question that you're struggling with and thinking about, I'm having a question about what I should do as a social worker, and sort of what is my obligation in that particular role, that's one where your first stop is probably going to be the college to help figure out, again, given that sort of particular understanding of social workers and their obligations and their role within the system and the obligations to the public, which is why we have the college as well. So all of those pieces would be a college question. But where it's questions about what should we do as a team or as an organization or as a system, those are ones where, and again, particularly where there's that our usual way of doing things isn't getting us to the place where we feel we should be. That's where the Ethics Nova Scotia Health or reaching out to NCHEN can be the sort of support that might be helpful. And recognizing that when we're coming up against a lot of those sort of big system questions, that I think what we can offer is that sense of doing something to address the concern, that we are raising it, that we are sort of, again, following it up and making those in decision-making roles aware of the ways in which, whether it be sort of policies are not living out their intent in practice, or where there's sort of gaps that, again, are leading to moral distress. And again, identifying those patterns. One of the benefits, I think, of engaging with Ethics Nova Scotia Health is that we sort of have the sense of things that are going on sort of across the system. So there may be things that folks working across the province in, for example, mental health and addiction, sort of challenges that they're aware of and they share, but we might see those challenges that are popping up in mental health and addictions, but they're also popping up over here in critical care for whatever reason. So being able to make some of those connections and, again, identify the broader patterns that are illustrative of some of the systemic causes and underlying causes of the distress, or those barriers that are preventing us as, again, teams, as organizations, as a system, from living out those values that we've identified as being those that guide our practice and our work. And so that's, again, the sort of thing that we're able to offer. And again, there may be other things where there's ethical aspects, but it's more, again, quality, legal, patient relations. And again, we've worked as Ethics Nova Scotia Health to develop relations with those groups as well, so that we're able to collaborate and get the folks who are most able to address the issue working on that. So knowing that we do want to have some time for robust questions, any last questions, just sort of clarification around sort of how to make that first call as to where to turn for ethics support? Seeing nothing in
All
the
right.
chat.
So let me just say a couple of closing comments before I stop recording. First of all, to thank you both so much for doing this. And the thing that I really want our members to know and walk away with is that no one is alone. And the challenge is that most of us as social workers feel alone and isolated in our respective workplaces for a variety of reasons. Some of these may stem from our own childhood experiences of feeling alone, like we're the only one who seems to care in a world that doesn't care. So we sometimes bring that in, and then we have our systems approach and our unique values as a profession, and often we're the only social worker within miles in our respective contexts. So it's very important for us to be reminded that we're not alone. So that's number one. Number two, we work in general as part of a team, but we are working in high crisis situations where we're running really fast and don't always have time to think and reflect. And the purpose of an ethics consultation process in healthcare is recognizing that healthcare is high stress and crisis oriented, that we need to set time to think deeply and create spaces where people of different disciplines can come together in order to ensure a fuller intersectional approach and understanding to our problems. And that's what this is there for. In order to have that, we need to slow down. And that's actually part of what becomes its own self-healing process. By slowing down, by having time to meet with other people, by being able to have the ethics committee track issues, to notice patterns, to notice this is happening not just here, but also here. That then gives weight to the ways in which this reports up within the system in order to try to shine a bright spotlight. So for example, in my prior hospital, one of the hospitals that I worked with, we had a cardiovascular intensive, and our patient population due to the opioid crisis changed dramatically from 85-year-olds with heart disease to 20-year-olds with endocarditis who had severe cardiovascular issues, but were still using, and because of the false split between physical health and mental health, they couldn't get the detox and counseling support they needed. So they were still using while they were in ICUs getting treated for endocarditis. And they needed to, we couldn't discharge them because they needed to be getting injection antibiotics. And so the false split between the physical health and the mental health was causing this severe moral distress where people were overdosing in patients were overdosing in our ICUs. This was an example of a system problem, but it took our ethics consult repeatedly getting requests to deal with this patient to then say, okay, this is a pattern. We had all the doctors and nurses and everyone had spent many hours discussing how to handle this individual situation. But now what can we do to go to the source to create better policies to address that? So that's really the vision of how to utilize the ethics consultation and have our social workers utilize that well as a form of advocacy for system change. What is worth noting is right now we are simply in early stage and we're just building this. Many of you may not work in healthcare. It's possible, nevertheless, maybe you're a school social worker or you're working in child welfare or something else, that you're aware of health-related issues. So that, number one, this is a process for you. My long-term dream is that we develop an ethics consultation process for holistic health that looks at the intersections of all of those other processes. That's a longer-term dream that perhaps Dr. Warren can join us in writing a grant for, and we can work on developing a better process and then advocate for government to be using something similar as part of our own advocacy for the decolonization of health, and to recognize that things like income and housing is part of health. But short term, we're working within this system, and this is the way we can do it. And the last thing that I just want to say before I stop recording and open it up to questions and discussion is you probably have seen from both Lauren and Dr. Warren that you can't, it takes time to convene people to have these conversations. So because we are used to working in a crisis and feeling alone, like no one else cares, we don't always call for help until it's like last, urgent. So part of the goal is you're not alone. Pay attention to the gut instinct that's telling you something's not right, and ask for help earlier. Contact us, contact Dr. Warren, contact us so we can contact Dr. Warren. There are millions of ways to do it, but begin. I could see that this situation with this patient that just got transferred to this floor is most likely in the next, week going to lead to the possibility of these ethical concerns. And that's the time to make the consult so that we can have that thinking that has already been done and dialogue that's begun, so that A, all of the members of the team are paying attention and watching, and B, that there isn't that crisis that can make it harder for us to think critically. And all of that starts with, we're not alone, we have help. We as social workers can partner with the bioethicists and the ethical consult team. And then what can we do to take this miniature version that we are creating here at the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers and replicate it, both in terms of a larger system level and potentially even to build a similar process for our colleagues, the Nova Scotia College of Physicians or whatever, which we are also working on building better collaborative processes with as part of our own commitment to decolonizing healthcare and decolonizing ourselves and working to remove the silos, which is really what leads to when we feel like we're alone and we only have our unique perspective, then we're not thinking, and that's when ethical problems can emerge. And what is the solution? Bring more eyes, bring more perspectives, bring more disciplines, bring more intersectional lenses to any given situation. Take some time, think, start to notice patterns, raise those patterns, and use that as part of deeper communication within the system. So with that, I'm going to stop recording. For those of you who are watching on a recording, this is why you want to be here live. And thank you all so very much.